Welcome to the ACL mentorship session. Today's discussion will be around interdisciplinary collaborations and how to work more on collaborations between NLP and other disciplines. And we are joined by Lucie Flek and Constantin Orasan as panelists. And we also have Zijing Jin here, has been one of the coordinators of the ACL mentorship session. And what I think would be a good start is to have the panelists introduce themselves, a little bit about yourself, what are your interests, and also if you can say a little bit about your experience with collaborations with other disciplines. Lucie, do you want to start?
Sure, why not? Yeah, so I've been switching a lot between different fields and subfields, and also between industry and academia, which is a different sort of cross-disciplinary approach as well. My original background is in computer science and physics. I studied large-scale computing for particle physics. I worked for some time on the Hadron Collider at CERN, on like big data processing mostly. And then from there, I got pulled by Google to pretty much doing the same with textual data. And that's what got me all into NLP research. And at some point, I realized that NLP research is not just about text and linguistics, but also a lot about people and understanding why people are saying certain things and which parts of their personal backgrounds are relevant to make them speak in a certain way in certain situations, and which part of the social context is relevant to make them behave in a certain way. So I started to work more with psychologists and sociologists as well. I did my PhD at the TU Darmstadt, but I also spent some time at the Positive Psychology Center at University of Pennsylvania, and later on, I also moved to UCL in London to work with also medical scientists on social media analysis for influenza spreading and the relations between mental and physical well-being. So I have been working mostly with people from the psychological and social science area, but I also came across more technical people from the particle physics part and various computer science applications, and also from people across people from the medical domain, with whom we also work now more in Marburg at the University of Marburg, where I am a professor now, doing things such as chatbots for medical applications and so on.
That's very impressive. It seems like a lot of collaborations with other disciplines. And also, I think it's interesting to observe how that happens, and maybe we can come back to it later if you had the chance to also do that during your industry stint. Because I think academia maybe, well, I shouldn't say anything, but I think it's interesting to observe the difference between academia and industry with respect to collaboration with other disciplines. Constantin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, so I'm Constantin. I'm professor in language and translation technologies at University of Surrey. And yeah, Rada suggested to introduce ourselves and give examples of how we collaborated. So I'll tell you a bit about my life story, but I promise to keep it short. And so I started, I did my background is in computer science. So my undergraduate studies were standard programming. I love programming. I thought it's so cool to write code. I even had a bit of time working for a company, writing code to crunch data, kind of standard warehouse data, things that used to be developed there. And I ended up in NLP a bit by accident because I was interested in artificial intelligence, and a professor kindly suggested, oh, why don't you look at the NLP? this is very interesting, this is emerging. But this was the time when, this was before 2000. So the fashion then was to develop parsers. You write a nice grammar that can parse sentences, and you build this nice representation, and wow, look how wonderful it is. But there wasn't that much collaboration. So afterwards, I went to do a PhD at the University of Wolverhampton, and I was working in the research group in computation linguistics. And yeah, that was a move that took me closer to linguistics. So there was the collaboration with other disciplines, but still early 2000, the emphasis was still on doing something which is interesting. We may need to get some input from linguists if we need to annotate some data, but there wasn't that much emphasis on what impact our research has. And this bit by bit evolved as the NLP technology matured, and there was more impact of what we are doing. We started focusing on more applications that are useful for people and that require interdisciplinary research. And probably one of the shocks I had, the early shocks I had, was during a European project. We wrote this European project that was meant to help people with autism, and the idea was quite cool and straightforward. We are going to use natural language processing to take a text, and the computer will crunch the data and will produce a text that is accessible for people with autism. It is simplified, and we thought, oh, surely this should work. There's so much work in statistical machine translation. Those were the days when statistical machine translation was at its peak, and there were some papers around showing that yes, it is possible to simplify language using statistical machine translation. So we thought, why not do it automatically? Obviously, this was a European project with a large consortium, with healthcare providers, with users. And that was the kind of shock when suddenly we realized, hold on, if we use NLP, we are going to cause more harm than help people with autism. NLP is nice when you evaluate the output in terms of BLEU scores, series scores, and so on. But if you involve users, you need to start thinking about other needs, and just by introducing errors in this text will cause more harm than helping the end users. And this is one of the big challenges when you start collaborating with other disciplines. You start thinking about users in some cases, and you need to take their interests. It's not just a matter of simple crunching some data, putting some tables, using automatic evaluation. No, you need to see what are their needs, and you need to start shaping your research depending on the needs of these users. And yeah, what happened with that project, with the first project, is we abandoned the idea of automatic simplification, and we ended up with a semi-automatic approach where we have the user in the loop, and who validates that would be the care of the person with autism. Recently, about 3 years ago, I moved from University of Wolverhampton to University of Surrey, and that was a bigger step in terms of disciplines, because I moved from research group in computation linguistics in Center for Translation Studies, and suddenly I was in a completely new environment where the focus was translation, interpreting. At that point, very much from a human perspective, but when I joined the group, it was also thanks to a big grant they secured to introduce more technology in the process of human translation, human interpreting. And suddenly that was also a big shock for me, because I was in an environment where users were very important. And what I discovered quite early on, and it's not that I wasn't aware, but it was a confirmation of what I thought, is you need to be ready to understand that the same term could mean differently in different disciplines. And I remember meetings when talking to my new colleagues, when we were using that same term, and obviously that something was not right, and they had a meaning, I had another meaning. I can't remember what it was. It was something like semantic unit, and what I consider semantic unit and what they considered. And yeah, you need to start thinking, I'm working with people from a different discipline. Be careful about the terminology you use and make sure that there is an understanding. Working with interdisciplinary is also very interesting, and definitely it opens up lots of potential research. Something that you need to be careful. I suppose most of the people attending here come from NLP/data science. I'm not going to rant about data science now. There is this trend of publishing a lot in NLP. I was looking at the number of publications PhD students and postdocs have these days in various conferences. I go, whew, good, I passed that stage and I don't need to churn so many publications. Quite often when you work interdisciplinary, and especially if you have human users, evaluators, the pace of publication is slower because you may need to run experiments and you need to involve these people, and quite often this takes time. So that's probably one of the things that you need to be aware. Different disciplines have different expectations in terms of publication, and you may not be able to churn up so many publications. But in terms of impact, you may be able to get something that is very interesting and can have a bigger impact than just tables of blur scores, comet scores, and so on. And something that is very important is when you work interdisciplinary, and again, when I keep saying interdisciplinary, but I have in mind very much interdisciplinary that involves users, ethics. Yeah, so, and I'm not talking about what are the ethical implications of the model, large model I'm going to release, but the fact that you have to involve users. And that was one of the big discoveries when I moved to Surrey, the fact that we need to collect data from translators, we need to carry out interviews, recordings, and you need to have a very sound ethical approval because you involve these users. It's not just I'm going to download some annotated data sets that are available. I'm going to crunch using my algorithm and I publish the results. No, it's that also needs to be taken into consideration. And yeah, I better finish. I'll stop here.
All right, thank you. That was quite a bit about your experience and lots of lessons shared. I really like your point about how interdisciplinary collaborations help us figure out that it's not just data, but data can be people. And so it gives a different meaning to the research. And I think that's something to really keep in mind. And I will also act as a panelist. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan, and I really thrive in interdisciplinary spaces. Almost since always, I work with other disciplines, and that's either in terms of, say, augmented language, acknowledging that there is more to communication than just language. So working, for instance, with people in mechanical engineering for sensing, like physiological sensing, people with computer vision to get information about, say, facial expression, gestures, and so forth. So in that direction of augmented language, and otherwise the direction which both Lucie and Constantin mentioned, other disciplines with respect to different applications of problems. And there I've been working with psychologists, I think, for the longest time. But I also, for the past 5 years or so, I started working quite extensively with people in healthcare. And that's both medical school and School of Public Health. Also, over time, I work with historians, political scientists, people in the humanities. And I guess the biggest lesson I learned that it's not as easy as it seems. Like many people talk about working with other disciplines. But I see some of the questions posted on Slido hint at that. There is a different language, which Constantin also mentioned. There is different goals, like different people have different publishing paces. There is quite a few differences. So it takes a while to build, but it's then really rewarding. So that's very briefly about me. And with that, we can move on to questions. I see there are already quite a few questions on Slido. And we can maybe start with one that talks a little bit more. I mean, both Constantin and I mentioned more, but advantages and limitations of interdisciplinary collaborations. So if you could, maybe Lucie, if you wanted to share your views on this.
Yeah, I would sign most of the points that Constantin had at the beginning, but there is definitely a lot of challenges in terms of establishing the cross-disciplinary communication. I think one definitely needs to focus more on setting up the right common ground, which takes time. So I also noticed that when starting cross-disciplinary collaborations, people use the same terms for something different. Like if you think of a word like bias, you talk to a physicist, he or she immediately thinks error bars and quantified measures and graphs where one Gaussian is moved somewhere else than another. If you tell bias to a psychologist, they think about cognitive bias and processes in the brain and a completely different story. So there's lots of terminology that needs to be established at the beginning. I also agree with the publication differences, and it's important when you start cross-disciplinary collaborations to set up the publication expectations at the beginning, because for some disciplines it's really important to go for like 50-page long publication in the journal, which has a certain index and nothing else counts, and the publication is gonna take 2 years and the 1-year ethical review and so on. And if you come from an NLP field and you know that without having a conference submission every 6 months, you're not gonna move on with your goals in 3 years, then you have to sort out for yourself how do you plan the project so that everybody's satisfied. There are also differences in other fields, like physics, for example, has a very, like particle physics had a very strong internal review where the paper, when it's posted on arXiv, is already seen by hundreds of people and approved, and it's basically considered a publication which can be cited by the press. While I think in our field it's very different. So aligning the expectations on this level is super important. That I think is one of the first challenges that one sees. From the point of focusing on the user, this is very true, and I saw this also in the industry time most of all, that I was like very excited after my PhD to apply all the state-of-the-art models that I've learned about and go for the newest technology to implement and get the best out of it as soon as I'm in the industry. But at the end, it was all about, do people like it? What do people say about it? And also about, do we know what it's doing and can we intervene? So for example, if there is an ethically problematic specific error, then you don't care that your model has a 95% accuracy. You care about this one thing, which is a no-go and which you have to fix. So if you have a huge neural network and you can't really go through and make sure that it doesn't make this specific mistake anymore, you need to have some sort of hybrid solutions for this type of problems. That's very common in cross-disciplinary collaborations as well. Yeah, so I would say main challenge is building up the transparency and the right common ground. The main benefit for me has been the complementary knowledge, because it's more work at the beginning, but at the end, it's more worth it than working just with people who know the same as you, think the same as you, and do exactly the same thing. So I think the biggest mistake during my PhD at the beginning was that I was thinking, okay, this person works on my topic, I should work with this person. But you should think exactly the other way around. Like, this person has a knowledge which I don't have. In which way can we complement each other to produce something new? And I think this type of collaboration leads to much more fun results and much more long-lasting results at the end, than doing something with like-minded people, which is the easy way.
Yeah, I really like that point. I think it's generally true that we think about finding other people who think like us, whereas really the benefit comes from people who don't think like us, although it may be harder to coordinate or have a communication channel, but can be more rewarding. Constantin, did you want to add anything? You already mentioned some before, but if you wanted to add some limitations, advantages you see.
Yeah, I'll mention a limitation. So also probably okay, let's start with advantages because they are linked. So one big advantage of doing interdisciplinary research is if you apply for funding. So, and this applies from even PhD level to all the way to professor. There is an increasing request that the research you are doing is interdisciplinary, because there is this idea, what is the impact of the research? There will be few pots of money that will fund blue sky research. There isn't necessarily this requirement for showing that how this could have an impact on the society, on the life of people, some kind of impact in the next few years. But the vast majority of research these days is about interdisciplinarity. So you need to show, even if it's not embedded in what you're doing, you need to show that this will have an impact in the near future. And quite often this requires you to work with people from other disciplines. There is also a drawback if you think about a PhD project. So definitely the PhD project needs to be interdisciplinary, but the question is, can you do all the research? If you need to start collaborating with other people who work in a different discipline and they need to inform your project, there's always this issue of what is your contribution and what is the contribution of the other person. And I think this is where the supervisors become very important. So if you collaborate with PhD students from psychology, let's say, you need to see what of the research is going to be part of your PhD and what of the research is going to be part of their PhD. So this is one thing that probably needs to be addressed very carefully by a PhD student in terms of when they come to the stage of submitting their thesis. But it's not something that is not it cannot be addressed. It's something that the supervisory team needs to keep an eye on and make sure that everything is clear, so there is no misunderstanding. Leaving this aside, I think in terms of PhD thesis, it would be fantastic if you can do interdisciplinary research. And this could be collaborating with some established researchers who don't need to submit a thesis, so this issue does not appear. You'll publish with them, you'll acknowledge the contribution, the thesis, and that's it.
I will just say one thing which I've been thinking recently with respect to the richness of interdisciplinarity. So if we pick one example, like say if we have 10 different disciplines, which is really not that many, there are many more out there. Like people working within the discipline, there will be like 10 different things, right? So 10 different areas. But then if you look at interdisciplinary spaces, if we take just pairs of two, like if you combine 10 things into pairs of two, you get 45 different spaces. So that's just like a math example of how rich this space is. So it's, to me, it's very rewarding. I mean, not everybody, of course, has to do interdisciplinary work, but it's a very it's a very rich space, and there is a lot to learn from there. But I think, which I hinted at earlier, like finding the rewards for each side, that's something that I learned the hard way. It's one of the more difficult things. I had one collaboration which eventually failed early on, where somebody from political science was interested in doing some work. And the project sounded very interesting, except that I realized that really what they wanted was somebody to program, which to them seemed very interesting. But to me as a researcher, didn't necessarily. And I can see myself doing the same mistakes. I could go to someone in psychology and say, I have this cool idea. Why don't we run a survey, which is really something that they do in Psychology 101. So finding things that are rewarding to each side can make a collaboration successful or not. So
I realized that recently also when I overheard a group of psychologists talking about a project with the computer science, like, oh no, they just want another user study, that's no research. I was like, what? Why? Isn't that what the psychology was there for? And then I was corrected very much. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah, related to this, one challenge is to make the other side aware of the limitation of the research. And if we take natural language processing, there are so many headlines out there suggesting that NLP solves every problem. And I think machine translation is a very good example. Oh, machine translation is solved. Translators are going to be out of job in the next few years. And yeah, this is when you start collaborating with someone, you need to make them aware from early on about the limitations, the mistakes NLP can introduce in the data. The fact that it's not magic. You can't just data in, translation, perfect translation out. And this is an experience I had with people working in literature. They wanted to use machine translation to translate Victorian literature from the 19th century. I said, and they were saying, which is the best machine translation engine we could use? How we can tune this to our data? And I thought, yeah, you can use it, but you won't get a good output. Yeah, getting this message across sometimes is not that easy. Sometimes it takes a few iterations and prove them. NLP is very good at crunching data, but you need to be aware of how well this happens.
So we have a fair number of questions on Slido, but just to give priority to the people here, since it's not a very large crowd, so maybe we could get questions from the people who are here on Zoom. So if anyone wants to ask a question, even if you ask it before on Slido, you can just ask it live if you want. And if you like, whenever you do, if you could also introduce yourself just briefly, like name and research area and maybe where you are.
Sure, I can go first. So I already asked this question on the app, but so my name is Amog. So I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Florida. I am currently working on dialogue systems. I'm also kind of intersecting with education and trying to work with tutoring and those kinds of dialogue applications. So my question was mainly about collaborating with areas like education, where it's really hard to collect some data because you have to go to actual classrooms. For instance, we sometimes do that and collect data, and we get like very small data sets. And then there's also the issue of how do you publish and make these data sets open, because when, say, for example, children are involved, it's not very easy to get consent to do openly publish on GitHub or something like that. So I feel like this has been an issue for me in terms of figuring out how to publish to venues like ACL, where you expect everything to be out there in the open. So just wondering if anyone has any tips to get around these kind of issues. Thanks.
Any thoughts from either Lucie or Constantin?
If I can be just blunt, you just don't publish at ACL. So yeah, I think it is it's something you need to decide. There are certain topics that will be appropriate for ACL and some topics will not. So first of all, you need to see how you present your results in order to make it appropriate for a venue like ACL. Obviously, you can't present it as a resource paper because you can't publish the data, and that's that's a problem that we have to face at sometimes. And I hinted when I mentioned the ethics. For certain types of research, and I'm sure for your research, you have to do it very thoroughly. You need to go through quite lengthy ethical approval process, especially if you have kids involved in collecting the data. And the data will be small. The data will not be. You can't release it. And unfortunately, I think this is a topic we still struggle these days, and I don't think there is a solution as such. But there will be very good venues where you will be able to present your data, and the emphasis in that case will not be the NLP techniques, but the research you are doing in order to help education. And that will not make the research less valuable. It's still.
Lucie, did you want to add anything, or?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. We're also struggling with the small data sets in many domains, like medical being a big issue, but also other like audio data from companies, stuff like that. One thing that worked for us recently for being still able to do NLP publications and so on has been augmenting the data with something similar, but open source and generally not that valid for the research in that other field, but similar in behavior. So for example, we have some studies for conversations between doctors and patients, which is obviously a no-go for publishing anywhere or even storing anywhere remotely accessible. But what we did there was having actors for patients and having them work in the class for medical students who represent the doctors and lead a similar type of conversations, which we can then record, process, publish, and they are very similar to the real ones. For example, we had a project on communication between pilots and traffic controllers, which is another no-go recording for any publication. It's the state security stuff. But there are huge video game communities where people fly the airplane on a computer and they talk to people on the other side who play the video game, a traffic controller. And you can find this kind of proxy data to do an NLP research, which is similar in terms of findings and publishable, and then transfer it to your in-domain data for the other community, for the other research community.
All right, well, thank you. I hope this answers your question. I'll only add that keep asking around, even places where you don't think of. Like for education, I would think there are places at universities where they will store data, or maybe people who are actually teaching. That's how I collected data for education. When I taught, I also asked, like, I had data just coming from the class itself. So try to think sort of out of the box in terms of whom to ask, and you may be surprised. So we can go to the next question. Sham?
Hi, my name is Shamsuddin, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Porto, Portugal. I'm working on sentiment analysis and follow research languages. So what I want to ask Constantin talk about something related to that. But first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this, because through this, I got in touch with mentorship. Some people that came over here to do presentation, such as Rada. I reached out to him. Rada is now my mentor, and we wrote a paper together, such as Saif Muhammad from Canada. Saif Muhammad, I reached out to him after his presentation here, and we are now collaborating, working on having semi-annual competition for African languages. So thank you for organizing this kind of event. Now, the question,
thanks for sharing. I think these are like success stories to put on our website.
Yeah,
We'd love to hear those. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. So my question is, I'm working with my supervisor, and he is someone working on, interested in symbolic approaches, and in these days, because he's, old, he likes symbolic, and in this world, I'm interested in deep learning, what is trending, and so he is not interested to work on that. And I reached out, for example, Savasya Rada here, when he met and we started collaboration. We had some, paper which is on deep learning and stuff like that. And now he understands, deep learning, give better performance, stuff like that. And now I'm writing thesis, and though I have some papers that are on symbolic, but he insisted that I must write what is my contribution on those papers that I have. I had collaboration, so I have a lot of collaborations. So he insisted that I should write specifically what is my contribution of those papers. On those papers, I'm the first author. In fact, I am the one that applied for grants to get like how to develop couples, stuff like that. And now we wrote the paper together. So how can one deal with such kind of issue on thesis? How can you specifically, when I write in the thesis, we develop this, he says, no, not we. If I say we, it means I should say specifically what I did. So what can you advise on this? Thank you.
Lucie or Constantin, I can also start.
I don't know. It's a difficult. It's a difficult case because I think it's fair enough. You need to justify what is your contribution to a paper, and you may have noticed that there's an increasing number of journals, open access journals, that have a section where you need to give the contribution of each author in the paper. And that's I think it's quite good for the transparency beforehand to say, okay, this author proposed the idea and implemented everything. This was in charge of checking statistical significance and so on. For PhD thesis, it's more difficult because it's such a big piece of work, and especially when you collaborate with different people, you can't just copy paste the papers in your thesis, put them in a coherent way, and bingo, that's the thesis. So there needs to be an acknowledgement from the co-authors, and ultimately it's about communication with all the people to agree, to make sure that no one feels somehow left out, not acknowledged. Quite often, what my advice for my PhD students is, because obviously they have papers, they have co-authors, to have an appendix and say, okay, some of the research presented in this thesis was previously presented in preliminary form in these publications, and there's the list of publications, and for each of the publications there's one or two sentences explaining what is the contribution of the PhD student in the papers. And in most of the cases they will be the first author, so they did most of the work. It shouldn't be a big issue. And I think you're going to be able to solve this issue by having an honest discussion with your supervisor, maybe have a discussion also with co-authors to make it clear that they acknowledge that you carried out most of the research, and you are entitled to present your work. And maybe if some of the work was done, so let's say statistical analysis, that's a kind of easy example to give, was carried out by someone else, and you feel that you should include that in the thesis because it gives a good context, it strengthens your comment, you can acknowledge this with a footnote saying, okay, this part was done by this person in the context of this collaboration. But yeah, it is difficult, and there isn't one solution except communication with everybody to make sure that there's no misunderstanding.
Oh, thank you. That was very comprehensive, and I hope that helps.
maybe just one thing to keep in mind that high-level contributions are equally important as sort of hands-on contributions. So you have to do all the analysis, all the coding to be a contributor. If you look at the contribution list for ACM publications, for example, like supervising the project, having the ideas, leading the collaboration is also part of the contributions. So don't feel ashamed if you had other collaborators doing part of the analysis. All of this is equally valuable, and you can list it in your keyboard.
If I can make a comment, more general comment related to the topic of today. One of the challenges of interdisciplinary collaborations is about publications, and yeah, this is what I'm discovering now. So computer science NLP papers tend to have lots of authors, all the kind of different people. Someone prepared the data, someone ran the model, someone wrote the paper. Yeah, if you want, in case you haven't seen, Google PhD comics order authors. That should be taken with the yeah. That's sarcasm, irony. But yeah, so there's the list of authors in computer science papers, and then now that I'm in a department that has more humanities, there's always this tension. Should a PhD student be the sole author of the paper because it's a journal paper where he spent lots of time and he wrote most of it, or the supervisor should be involved because actually this is something emerging from the discussions that are happening. And yeah, coming from computer science, to me, such a question seems quite bizarre, but it seems that in humanities, it is still an ongoing discussion. And you may discover similar situations in other disciplines.
Which goes back to an earlier point that was made, that clarifying expectations, habits early on, it's probably a good idea. So let's move on to the next question. Ruyuan, you want to ask your question?
Yes. Hello. Ruyuan,
and also introduce yourself briefly.
Okay. Today I'm working on intersection of HCI and NLP. So my question is about doing interplanar research from two different fields, but has overlapping. I'm interested to be an interdisciplinary researcher, but my advisor advised me doing interdisciplinary research, you still have to pick a side to identify yourself. Either you're an NLP researcher or HCI researcher. You may do interdisciplinary research by collaboration, but you need to identify which community you're coming from as a PhD student. So I would like to take in some advice, like doing interplanary research. Could I make myself be a person standing for two kinds of research, or I have to develop my own skills in one community deeply, but doing this interdisciplinary research with other expertise from the other side?
So I can just start, and then Lucie and Constantin, if you want to add things. I would say it's probably mostly from the perspective of a difficulty for you, especially as a more like junior researcher. It's harder to make an impact on two different areas at once. So maybe the advice comes from that space. So if you wanted to make an impact both in NLP and HCI, probably will entail, say, in terms of a pragmatic thing, attending conferences. You will be going to, say, ACL, NLP and ACL, and also CHI and user interfaces and some of the other conferences. And in terms of how people, how you present your work, how people will perceive that work, the kind of networking that you will start making, it might be just difficult to do it in both. So I would think from that perspective, it's just harder on you. Ideal setting is if there would be a conference that would faculty for both HCI and NLP. And I'm hoping that will happen soon. I think it's just sort of happening, but right now I don't really know, other than having some specialized papers within ACL and probably similarly at CHI, you'll see some NLP papers. A similar thing was with computational social science. Nowadays, there are entire conferences on that, but it wasn't always the case. So if you're working in this space, you would have to pick a side, like either publish in computer science or publish in social sciences. But things change over time. So maybe Lucie and Constantin have something to add. So it's mostly thinking from also what do you want and how much bandwidth you have to make impact. That's also another question to ask yourself.
Yeah. Thanks for largely sharing your point of view, and thanks for your answer. That's a very interesting question. I would also say when there is no cross-disciplinary collaboration established, one kind of has to pick a side at the beginning to build a network, but I don't think that means abandoning your research questions. So if you feel like your profile is exactly half HCI, half NLP, and this is what you like doing, just stick to it, profile yourself that way, and it's gonna pay off in more senior stage in your career, like through your postdoc, junior faculty, like having reach over one discipline a little bit farther to another is definitely what makes a difference. At this point where you kind of need to get to know the community and build your network, it's probably easier if you first choose one or the other to start from, and then you can attempt things like organizing cross-disciplinary workshops and so on to take an active role in building the communities together, picking up online sessions where you can bring the people to talk to each other. That's might be a lot of overhead at the beginning of your PhD.
Yeah, there isn't much I can add to this. I definitely agree with Lucie's comment about workshops. I think workshops are a very good venue to have something very specific where you can have interdisciplinary research. So if there are enough researchers interested in this topic, you can always propose a workshop at one of the big conferences, and you can start building the network, the community. Definitely don't abandon your research question. Interdisciplinary research is very interesting, but yeah, you need to decide where you are going to publish. Largely, you need to think what you want to do after the PhD, because sadly, we say that a person is judged on the merit of the CV, but different people will judge conferences, venues differently depending on which field they come. So yeah, obviously, if you apply for a job that is in HCI, they will check your CV and they will expect HCI conferences. Yeah, we may have papers in ACL conferences, but they may not be able to judge how difficult it is to get a paper accepted there. So you will need to think in terms of future steps, next steps, what is the best venue of presenting your research without abandoning it.
This said, there are, I mean, I know when we look for faculty applicants, for instance, people who have this kind of dual expertise are fairly rare and fairly hard to find too. So for instance, somebody who does AI and privacy, I could see NLP and ACI. So there is a place for people like this. It's just a little harder. So Tian Cheng, you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, I'm a first-year PhD student at Cambridge, and I'm working on the intersection of natural language processing and computational social science. So I'm in this situation where I have an idea that's quite interdisciplinary, and my supervisor coming from NLP couldn't offer too much help on. While I think my idea is completely valid, but because I don't have full domain knowledge and expertise in, so in my case, it's in the communication studies or journalism. But then also my supervisor doesn't really have like an established connection with that field. Then in this case, I guess, should I just try to like cold email people, or?
Yeah, all established connections started somewhere from a non-established place. So why not?
Also, just a general question. So I see there are more and more quite successful interdisciplinary work now being published in, for example, PNAS and so on. Do you have a sense of, in general, how do these start? Like, do they start from the more NLP or computer science side, or there's a question in social science that people want to answer and then they find computer science people? So I'm just curious if you know anything about that.
I mean, my own experience with that is, I mean, it was an existing collaboration, so it really stemmed from the collaboration itself, like from the questions that we were discussing. There was work that we eventually ended up submitting to one of those journals. But you can also look, like if there is a particular, like this is a very specific question, so you can look back at PNAS and see where are people, like the authors, where are they from, just in terms of seeing whether it's heavier on, say, one discipline or another. You can also look at, I mean, that's a lot of guessing, but who's the lead author, who's the senior author? So, I mean, you can also reach out and ask. People are generally happy to answer, specifically if it's very specific questions. But I think what I find is that people are very open to at least having a first discussion, and there is nothing to lose there, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the first discussion will lead to an established collaboration. So just reach out. I mean, the worst that can happen is that you don't get a reply. Well, sort of too bad next time. You reach out to somebody else. You can also follow up. I think emails is a little bit out of, I don't know, it's too much email these days. So you can do a follow-up. If there is still no reply, you find somebody else. And you can eventually also see people who seem to be already open to that, like people who in social science who work already with maybe NLP people. So that could be another possible starting point.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, maybe we can just get some.
I just wanted to make a comment about interdisciplinary research and your PhD in particular. Keep in mind, a PhD is about 3 years. 3 years seems long, but goes very quickly, and is not unusual.
I think that's different in US and UK.
Okay, yeah,
maybe it's 5 years.
Regardless, it goes very quickly, and it's not unusual that interdisciplinary research requires more time. So ask yourself whether you really need to address the whole question in one go, or you can chop it into something that you can do for your PhD, and something that you can follow up once you get a better understanding of your field as a postdoc.
Yeah.
So any final, brief remarks on collaborations with other disciplines before we close?
Just a quick encouragement from my side, all in for cold call emails. So half of my best collaborations started just as a cold call during my PhD. So you might not necessarily directly contact the head of the lab, but contact other PhDs, postdocs who you need the expertise from. You can even write to the professors. It's not a big deal. I also answer as a professor to students who contact me when my time allows. Not always, they have better chance to reach to my PhDs, but eventually I reply as well. So go for it. I haven't seen anybody who would be unhappy for people from other disciplines setting up the collaboration.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say, interdisciplinary research is very cool, and I think now NLP got to this level of maturity where it can be applied. There is so much text and so many disciplines needs that text crunched. So lots of potential there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, just make sure that you find it rewarding in whatever you invest time in, but it's true. There is a lot of potential in the space between disciplines. So with that, thank you very much. Thanks, Lucie and Constantin, and also thanks, Jijing. And thanks everyone for your thoughtful questions. It was a great discussion. And we'll soon have this online, and we hope to see you at other mentorship sessions.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you for the invitation. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.